So picture this. It's the 17th century, and Japan is supposedly in a time of peace. The powerful Tokugawa Shogunate had brought the country together, finally ending a long, bloody period of civil war. But then, in 1637, on this one peninsula, Shimabara, a massive rebellion just explodes. It completely shatters that peace and ends up changing the course of Japanese history for centuries to come.
Now, a lot of people will tell you this was just a holy war, a simple Christian uprising against a government that was cracking down on them. But the truth? Well, as always, it's way more complicated than that. This rebellion wasn't just about faith. It was a desperate, violent explosion of anger that had been simmering for years.
Okay, let's really get into this. And to understand just how desperate this fight was, you have to look at the numbers. We are talking about maybe 37,000 rebels, mostly peasants, some masterless samurai, and they're going up against a professional government army of over 125,000 soldiers. This was a true David versus Goliath situation right from the very start.
So what on earth could drive people to take on odds like that? Well, a rebellion this huge doesn't just pop up out of nowhere. It was the result of a perfect storm, really, a whole bunch of grievances that have been building and building for years.
It all really boils down to three main things. Three flames, if you will, that lit this huge fire. You had absolutely crippling taxes, brutal religious persecution, and on top of all that, a devastating famine that was pushing everyone to the edge. Let's start with the money. The local lord, a guy named Matsukura Katsuie, he was ambitious. He wanted a magnificent new castle, and to pay for it, he basically squeezed his people for every last drop. I mean, the taxes became so unbearable, they were pushing already poor communities to the absolute brink of starvation.
And to get the religious piece of this puzzle, you've got to understand that this particular region had a really long history with Christianity. But the new lords, their job was to stamp it out, completely. And this wasn't just, a simple ban. We're talking about violent public persecution that added this powerful ideological fuel to the economic fire.
So here's the crucial thing to remember. This was not just a peasant uprising. The rebel forces were actually this incredibly diverse mix of desperate people. You had poor farmers fighting right alongside masterless samurai. These are trained warriors called rōnin, who had no lord to serve. And they were joined by fishermen, merchants, craftsmen, basically anyone and everyone who had finally been pushed too far.
And of course, a movement like this, it needs a leader, right? A symbol for everyone to rally around. For this desperate alliance, that symbol came in the form of a young, almost messianic figure.
This is the banner they fought under. And their leader? He was a 16-year-old kid named Amakusa Shirō. He was seen as a prophet, almost like a miracle worker sent from heaven. His charisma, his youth, it was magnetic. He was the one who managed to unite all these different angry groups under one single powerful cause.
Okay, so they have their leader, their numbers are growing, and now the rebels make their stand. This brings us to the most dramatic part of the whole story, a brutal, months-long siege at a ruined castle right by the sea.
The rebels took over the ruins of Hara Castle, and this was a strategically genius move. It was on a peninsula, hard to attack. They used wood from their own boats to build up the defenses, and they turned this crumbling old fortress into a nearly impenetrable stronghold, stocked with weapons and food they'd taken from their oppressors. And their toughness was just incredible. For months, through a really harsh winter, this small rebel force held their ground. They fought off attack after attack from the huge, well-equipped shogunate army. They actually inflicted heavy casualties, which was incredibly frustrating and embarrassing for the most powerful military in Japan.
Well, the shogunate was getting desperate. I mean, really desperate. The siege was costing them a fortune, and it was a huge embarrassment. So they made a really shocking, controversial decision. They asked for help from foreigners, specifically the Dutch traders, who were pretty much the only Europeans still allowed in Japan at the time.
And the Dutch, they said yes. They provided gunpowder and cannons, and their ship, the Die Ripe, sailed right into the bay. It started bombarding the rebel fortress from the water, bringing foreign firepower into what was supposed to be a domestic Japanese conflict. And the rebels? Oh, they had a response. They literally shot an arrow into the enemy camp with a message tied to it that said, "Are there no longer courageous soldiers in the realm to do combat with us? And weren't they ashamed to have called in the assistance of foreigners against our small contingent?" Wow.
This message was so effective, so shaming, that the Japanese commanders actually told the Dutch to back off.
But as amazing as that was, defiance and courage can only get you so far. With their food and ammunition almost gone, the rebellion was heading for its inevitable, tragic, and incredibly brutal end.
The final cost, it's just staggering to look at. The shogunate definitely took heavy losses, about 11,000 men killed. But the rebels, they faced total annihilation. When that castle finally fell, there was absolutely no mercy.
On April 15, 1638, the shogunate forces launched their final, overwhelming assault. The last of the rebels were crushed. Their charismatic young leader, Amakusa Shirō, was captured and beheaded, and his head was put on a spike in Nagasaki as a gruesome warning to anyone else who might even think about defying the government.
And they didn't just stop with the leader. The shogunate executed an estimated 37,000 rebels and sympathizers. Hara Castle was completely burned to the ground, and its ruins were literally buried along with the bodies of the dead. It was a very deliberate, systematic effort to erase the rebellion from history and from the land itself.
But you can't just erase an event this big. The Shimabara Rebellion sent a massive shockwave through Japan, and its legacy would become one of the most profound in the entire nation's history.
You see, for the shogunate, this whole rebellion was basically their worst nightmare come true. It confirmed their deepest fears, that foreign influence, especially Christianity, was a dangerous, destabilizing threat. This led them to double down on a policy known as sakoku, which literally means chained country, a policy of almost total national isolation.
And I mean, you can draw a straight line from one event to the next. The year after the rebellion was crushed, the Portuguese traders, who the shogunate suspected of helping the rebels, were kicked out for good. The sakoku policy was made even stricter, and Japan basically slammed its doors shut to the rest of the world. This self-imposed isolation would last for more than 200 years until American warships finally forced the country back open in 1853.
It's just an incredible legacy when you think about it. One single uprising, born from this perfect storm of suffering, played a huge role in sealing an entire nation off from the globe. And it leaves us with a really powerful question to think about. What happens when the fear of an idea becomes stronger than the desire for connection?